Welcome back to our study of the psychology of the criminally insane. Today we're going to take a look at serial killers, and first we need to define what that means. These are people who are going to perpetrate a series of murders, multiple victims. Sometimes there's no real motive behind what's happening, and this typically follows some type of characteristic or predictable pattern. These are all premeditated. Some of them have a lot of planning going into it. They involve fantasy and different forms of addiction. Sometimes it is driven by a very strong sexual element. And when it comes to serial killing, there are three main categories of serial killers that we're going to look at. Our first type of serial killer is going to be known as our angels of death, or our angels of mercy. These are our unscrupulous doctors or nurses, caregivers, people that are taking care of those that are sick or elderly, vulnerable people, and they perform mercy killings at the beginning. They see somebody that's suffering really bad and they want to help them, they want to end their pain, so they administer a drug a little bit too much and overdose them and kill them that way. Or there's different ways that they do it, but the behavior begins to escalate. They like doing this, they like the feeling they get, the power of killing people, so they begin to kill people that aren't suffering, that can easily be treated, that are healthy, and their behavior just escalates and gets worse and worse and worse until they usually eventually get caught. There's many examples of our angel of death type serial killer. I'll mention a couple and tell you a little bit about them. Donald Harvey will be the first one, and he was an orderly in a cardiac ward for 17 years. He really enjoyed ending the suffering of all of his patients. He killed over 50 of them. He would smother them with pillows, or he would inject them with too much of their medication or poison them somehow. He was eventually caught not killing anybody. He was stealing body parts to use in some sort of occult ritual that he was doing, and after he was arrested for that is when he gave police his confession for all of the murders that he had done. The next one is Michael Swango. He's known as Dr. Death, and he loved to use poison. It's estimated that he killed up to 60 patients in the US, and he eventually fled to Zimbabwe and kept up his killing spree as a doctor. He also attempted to poison his co-workers with bringing them chicken that's laced with arsenic or other type of poison. He was always trying to poison his girlfriends and his families and the children that he was supposed to be taking care of. He kept a journal, and in that journal he wrote about the wonderful feeling of joy, the exuberant feeling of joy that he felt when he took somebody's life. He came back to the United States after his killing spree in Zimbabwe and was arrested. On his way in from the airport, he confessed to 4 murders, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. A lot of the evidence for the rest of the crimes he committed have been lost. They were just thrown away. People don't keep needles for injections lying around. So that's all he was convicted of, but they think he killed as many as 60 people on his little crime spree. Our next type of serial killer, I'm not going to say is the rarest, they are just the ones that we don't hear about as often. A lot of times because they go around undetected. You don't have to be caught and be serving a life sentence in prison to have been a serial killer. Some serial killers, they get away with it, and they live out their life with what they've done. The one I want to look at today is the Zodiac Killer. This is somebody that has never been caught, did several killings in Northern California, was on a killing spree that lasted several years, has claimed that they've killed over 37 people from the 1960s to the 1970s. They left a lot of letters from for the police and for the FBI to try to claim certain crimes that had been perpetrated in the area. There's some discrepancies involved because there's a lot of copycats and there's a lot of people that tried to get in on what this person was doing, so there was different letters that don't seem to be authentic, so we'll never know because we never caught the guy. So what makes this type of a killer actually be more successful and it seemed like it's more rare is one, they commit multiple murders, but they can spread it out over a long period of time. They're not going to go just on a mass killing spree. They'll just do periodic random events. They have no sexual motive in what they're doing. They don't need to fulfill a sexual fantasy that's involved in killing their victim. This is the main thing that separates them from most of our serial killers that we know about. Our Jeffrey Dahmers, our Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy, all of them have the sexual motive in the crimes they're committing. The Zodiac Killer doesn't have that. Their victims are completely randomly selected. They do have a serial signature, but they don't have the signature in the victims that they're choosing. They can take any victim at any time that they have the opportunity to do what they're going to do. But they always use the same kind of means somehow, so there is the signature there, that repeated methodology. There's a lot of signs of psychopathy, this delusions of grandiosity. You can't catch me, I'm better than you. They taunt the police. The Zodiac wrote letters that had really important details, only details that the killer could know, or it would contain artifacts like the cabbie that was murdered. A piece of the bloody shirt was actually attached. The Zodiac would write cryptic ciphers or codes that have a secret message in it. One of these has been deciphered. What it says is, I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and the I have killed will be my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. And then whatever it says at the end was not deciphered. We don't know what that means. So that's our second type of serial killer, the one with random selected victims, no sexual motive, signatures, repeated methodology, very, very hard to catch. Alright, so now to get to the type that whenever you say the phrase serial killer, this is what comes to mind. The phrase is kind of thrown around loosely, used in ambiguous ways, making the definition a little unclear. But when we say serial killer, this is what comes to mind: men that are committing serial sexual homicide. There's a definite sexual motive to what they're doing. Everything about the crime and about the motive and about the methodology has some sort of ritualistic behavior, a characteristic pattern that's just going to repeat itself with every new crime scene. Every new victim is going to have that repeated type of ritual along with it. That's what their signature is. Sometimes this can be in the type of victim that they choose, whether it's young girls or young boys. It could be the method of killing that they do. They could be stranglers using their bare hands or ropes. They could be using knives or guns, but they stick to whatever they're doing, and they do it over and over and over again. And usually they're living out some kind of fantasy, whether it's a sexual-based fantasy or some type of revenge-based fantasy for some sort of sexual trauma that they had endured. But this is the type we're going to concentrate on. This is the thing that comes to people's minds when you mention serial killer. So for our purpose, we're trying to find out the why of these serial killers. We want to look at the psychology, the way that they ended up where they are. Was it some sort of genetic predisposition? Were they born this way and eventually going to be a criminal anyway? Was it because of the environment that they were raised up in, or was it some mixture of both of those elements? So there's this immortal argument in psychology of nature versus nurture, or both in most cases. So let's take a look at the nature side of these serial killers. And the first thing that people think is that these people must be crazy. They must be suffering from some kind of mental illness. And some of them are. It is not a prerequisite. It is not all of them. It's not even the majority of them that are suffering from mental illness, especially these severe mental illnesses with psychosis attached. The first one most people bring up or think about is schizophrenia. The son of Sam, the dog told me to do it. I'm hearing voices. The devil told me to kill her. My mom became the devil. All of these delusions that schizophrenic people have that lead to serial killing are a genetic predisposition. This is something that was passed on through the family and inherited eventually. It doesn't mean that they are going to end up in the situation where they're serial killers. All schizophrenics are not serial killers. All schizophrenics are not violent. It is just one of many determining factors that you can look at to see if someone could have the potential of being a violent, habitual, repeat signature type of offender. So the next genetic predisposition is manic depression. This is bipolar. It's the one day you're up and you're going to stay up in this huge high for a while, and then you're going to go down and you're going to be in the depths of depression for a while. It's usually in the manic state that crimes are committed because you're on top of the world, you can't get caught. It is a genetic type of highs and lows that medication can take care of, but as we've discussed before, these mental illnesses are really hard to keep under control because what's going on in your head is reality to you. You don't know any different, so you don't believe that you're sick. You end up not trusting your doctors, and you don't take your medication, and you relapse back into this whole full-blown psychosis, and it becomes a revolving door of being in and out of institutions all of the time. So our next one is autism, especially what they used to call Asperger's syndrome. It's a milder form of autism. And the last one is the delusional disorder. These are all genetically passed mental illnesses that are indicators of potential violent behavior later in life. Our next level of indicators are psychiatric conditions. These are less severe than mental illness. They don't have the element of psychosis to them. And again, these are by themselves, people live with these all of the time, and they don't become violent, habitual serial offenders. These are just indicators that somebody could potentially become violent. However, most serial killers don't only have one of these. They have a mix and a combination of the entire menu of different things that are part of nature, part of nurture, and different mixed things as well. So our first one is attention deficit disorder. This is a very common thing that millions of people have throughout the world, and it's not debilitating. People live and adjust with it every day. Richard Ramirez is a serial killer that had attention deficit disorder, but there's other things that happened to him that, in combination with his psychiatric condition, made it that he was more predisposed to the violent behavior. Alcoholism is a big one, especially the inheritable type, to where you have generations of family members that were alcoholic, and that lowers the inhibitions, and it makes it so that you're more willing to commit some sort of heinous act or violent crime. Epilepsy is our next one. And then the last one that's really important, especially when talking about sexual serial homicide, is the inordinate sex drive. This is an imbalance in the natural levels of testosterone in the body. For some reason, the person has a genetic predisposition to have more testosterone than the average person does. So this influx of this male hormone causes more aggressive and more violent behavior, especially in larger doses. And our third grouping of nature indicators are going to be our personality disorders. And some of these are a lot stronger than the other ones for predicting types of violent behavior, such as antisocial personality disorder. We've discussed these in previous videos. These people are definitely more prone to violence than other people are. The psychopathic disorder, anybody that's been diagnosed with psychopathy, while they might not ever commit an act of violence, they are much more prone to be violent and act in outlandish ways than somebody that hasn't been diagnosed with psychopathy. Another one that is really interesting, like Ed Kemper would be someone that has this disorder, is the schizoid personality disorder. And the schizoid personality is an avoidant type of personality. They don't like to interact with people, go to social events. They don't really form personal relationships with other people. These would be our loners, the extremely shy people. So they are a strong indicator of somebody that might end up committing these types of crimes. The paranoid personality is right up there with the rest of them. And then finally, the impulsive aggressive or the intermittent explosive personality disorder. That's kind of self-explanatory. These people are prone to fits of rage at times and can lead to this type of activity where a serial habitual homicide comes into play. So let's look at the nurture side of this. This is the environmental factors that you grow up with that determine the outcome of your personality and who you're going to be as a person. The number one factor in this equation is going to be what's called parental cruelty. It's that cycle of violence. If there is a consistent and horrific type of violent situation going on in the house directed at the child, they more than likely are going to grow up and perpetrate violence on somebody else. whether it's their spouse or children, or they become a violent criminal, or they become a habitual violent offender like the serial killers that we were talking about. Another aspect of that is the neglect or abandonment. If you're hungry all of the time, you're needing to steal, it's going to start this criminal activity young in childhood. Abandonment, just being left on the street. You can be abandoned by a parent and the parent still be there if they're having some sort of substance abuse issues, or if they are extremely egocentric and not taking care of anyone else's needs but theirs. So what parents do to these serial killers really helps determine the outcome of them. And when you combine that with some type of mental illness or psychiatric condition, then it can exacerbate things to turn it into some of the horrific situations that we've seen. That includes verbal abuse and humiliation, just making fun of somebody all the time, constantly putting them down, embarrassing them in front of other people. The things that parents do, especially in the terms of the people we're looking at, definitely plays a role. Some of these offenders in their interviews said that they were living out a fantasy of killing their mother over and over and over again. Every time they murdered somebody, they weren't murdering that person. They were enacting revenge for what had happened to them in their childhood. So it's a very strong force along with the nature side of the equation. When a parent dies, it is definitely a traumatic situation for anybody, especially if it's a violent death, and if you witness that and have some sort of PTSD because of what was going on in that situation. One of the number one indicators for criminal activity is going to be a fatherless childhood, whether the father has died, or if they are evicted from the house because of divorce, or if they've abandoned the family. If the father's not in the home, then the likelihood that the child is going to end up in prison just goes through the roof. So dad not being around is going to make it so that children have a higher likelihood of being in trouble and not having a good life or having a violent life. Right along with that is parental divorce, especially at an early age. If it happens before the age of 16, the impact is severe. The older the child is, the more they understand about personal relationships, and that Disney and Santa Claus are not what dictates the world, so they can empathize with the parents a little bit, but before that, it can be a detrimental factor in a child's life and the way they're going to grow up from that point on. The adoption and the foster systems have put out a lot of criminals. Not everybody that is in these systems are good people. There's abuse that goes on in these families. There's jealousy between biological entities and then the adopted child. There's a lot of questioning of, my mom and dad didn't love me, so I'm stuck in this situation. I've been lied to all of my life. It can cause a lot of bitter anger, resentment. The socioeconomic class definitely plays a role. More serial killers and more murderers and more criminals that perpetrate violent crimes such as rape or murder come from low-income families and neighborhoods. Familial sexuality, an incestual relationship, being seduced by your mother, being raped or sodomized by your father or a sibling, that type of improper sexual relationship is going to play a role in your mental health and your propensity to commit violent acts in the future. Then there are accidents of brain disease or brain damage, especially from some sort of head injury or an accident, can change the chemistry of the brain to like flip the violence switch inside somebody's head. And those accidents can change people overnight. Traumatic brain injuries are very serious, and they can cause somebody to become violent to the point that they are serial killers. And then there is the influence of violent TV and video games. This doesn't create serial killers, it doesn't train them on how to do it, but what it does is it desensitizes the person to the violence. It's the same as target practice on a lifelike individual. It takes that element of actually shooting somebody and diminishes the severity of it. This is the technique that the DC shooter was using to train his young accomplice, Malvo. Sometimes it is hard to tell if something came from genes and from nature, or if it was part of the environment. So we'll call these mixed traits that could be both or neither for all that we know. And the first one is going to be paraphilia. This is like an over-the-top kind of sexual conduct, a kink, like voyeurism or exhibitionism taken to a different level, where you want to be watched or you want to watch somebody else. Frauderism, when you rub up on other people that are unsuspecting in public. It's a type of sexual assault. Masochism or sexual sadism, where you like to get off to seeing other people in pain. These extreme forms of bondage and torture bondage that go well beyond what normal sexual play would actually encompass. Now, we've seen in other cases like the Santi Kimes case that juvenile delinquency can play a huge role in the outcome of somebody's life. If you learn how to steal when you're really young, and that's the way you start going through life, and that's the life that you know, then that's going to carry on into adulthood. Substance abuse is another one. Drug use, especially some of the more hardcore drugs like cocaine, LSD, angel dust, things that make you hallucinate and believe that things are happening that are not real. We saw the case with the marijuana, the Rakowitz murder in the park, where he actually boiled the dancer's head and put it in a bucket of kitty litter and fed the remains to the homeless. That's all substance abuse causing a mental illness that leads to violence. And alcoholism is going to be the same way. Conduct disorder, this is a disorder in juveniles that makes it so that they have outbursts and disobey the rules and do things to get attention. It's outside of their realm of control, and it becomes a habitual act. And then in adulthood, that tends to manifest into breaking larger rules and having larger outbursts, leading to violence and habitual offense. The ones we all know are what they call the McDonald triad: animal torture, like Ira Einhorn would throw cats in the shower, or Jeffrey Dahmer would practice butchering animals before moving on to humans. The second part of the triad is fire setting, committing acts of arson. This draws more attention than the other two, because you're destroying property and people are going to be reporting you to the police. And then the third one's going to be bedwetting. So those three things are what the FBI early considered to be the signs of a serial killer. And then Our last one that's pretty obvious is any type of rape or sexual offenses that happen during adolescence, during the onset of puberty, not being able to control your urges in normal society, and taking advantage of somebody else when they're not consenting to what's going on. The element of torture is the thing that sets the sexual serial killer apart from other types of violent offenders. Not just the element of rape, but the element of inflicting as much pain as possible on another human being before or after they've already died. There's always a sexual aspect. Sometimes it's post-mortem, where it's necrophilic, or it's during the murder, or well before. In the case of David Parker Ray, it was before, and it was a long time before. He lived in Elephant Butte, New Mexico, and he had a mobile home down there, a trailer, and he purchased a cargo trailer that he turned into what he called a toy box. Now, inside this toy box, he had all sorts of devices that he had made with his mechanical ability. He could weld, and he could invent all sorts of things that the Spanish Inquisition would be jealous of. He had a gynecological chair, a professional doctor's chair to do exams on women that he would had modified so that he could strap them in there and they couldn't get away. He routinely participated in serial sexual kidnappings, prolonged torture for several days, and then eventually selling the victims into slavery or killing them. He recorded with a VHS camera the torture of hundreds of women. They all died on camera, some of them anyway, and the FBI couldn't identify the majority of them. There was one that they could because of a partial tattoo, but the rest of them, nobody knows who they are. He's suspected of killing anywhere from 14 to 60 women, and kidnapping, drugging, and torturing hundreds of them. His accomplices, which were his girlfriend and his daughter that he was having an intimate relationship with, they were given deals to testify against David Parker Ray. Cindy Hattie was the girlfriend. She got off because she told the district attorney about all of the 60 women that he had bragged to her that he had killed, and David Parker Ray eventually confessed if they would let his daughter off. So the daughter walks free, Cindy Hattie walks free, and then David Parker Ray is convicted, but as soon as he gets into jail, he dies of a heart attack. So two of these sadistic people that committed these crimes are walking free among us. The other one wasn't really punished. I can't tell you more about David Parker Ray because it is inappropriate to say any of the things that he really did. There's a lot of really good documentaries on him and some of the things that he did if you want to check out the extremities that this person went to harm other people, why he is the ideal example, for lack of a better word, of a torturer type of serial killer. Then look some of this stuff up. It is definitely mind-bending. It is boggling. It will make you sick to your stomach. The tapes that he made, the methodology that he used was horrific and disgusting. So if you didn't believe in evil before, perhaps David Parker Ray can change your mind. Alright guys, thanks for watching. What do you think? What are the things that make somebody go into this type of horrific, violent lifestyle where they just do these unimaginable things to other people? Is it some sort of genetic manifestation that makes this happen? Is it the environment that they grew up in? Is it a mixture of all of these things? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next time.